everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we are continuing on with our series where we are making Lillian the Lamb from the Lilly Rose Dolls collection, and here's Lillian in all of her kit glory. Now you can get your kits from Lilly Rose Dolls, and I'll pop the address up here for you, the web address up here for you to be able to order, because it really does have all of the materials and supplies that you need in there in order to be able to make this character, or most of them. The things like elastic and thread aren't included, but you'll have those in your stash anyway. And so far, this is how far we've got with our Lillian, looking all lovely and adorable there with her lovely ears, her face, and then the last video we completed her bloomers for her. So she's got lovely lace edge bloomers there, and the videos for how to make her limbs, her body, her head, attach it all together and make her bloomers are already live on my YouTube channel for you. And today we're going to carry on now with making the dress. So the dress is made out of the same fabric as the bloomers, and that sits underneath the lovely then floral pinafore dress which will go on top, and then finally we'll make her little circlet out of her flowers in order to finish her off. So I hope you're enjoying stitching along with me today, and if you are, then if you want to be notified of any other videos that I put up, then if you click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, then you will get a notification whenever I upload any new videos. And at the moment we've got Byron the Highland cow, and also I've got the clothes for Henrietta the female hedgehog to do as well yet, so those will all be coming before we move on to anything new. Right, let me get the camera turned down and I will get started, although I'll probably pop a little video in for you, Back to the Future style, just so you can see the dress when that's made in a moment, and then you'll be able to then carry on with confidence that everything I tell you in the video will work out beautifully. Okay, let's get started. Hello everybody, it's Claire here, and just in Back to the Future style as I promised, here is Lillian in the finished dress that we are making in this video. So I just wanted to show that to you so that you can see how beautifully flat this collar is sitting, the lovely lace on the front, how nicely set in those sleeves they are, the lovely fullness to the skirt, which is fabulous, and then obviously she's got her bloomers that you've already made. But I just hoped that by popping back and just giving you a little show and tell, that it'll inspire you to keep going and to watch the rest of the video. I'll get on with it now. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is to get your pattern from out of your kit, and you're going to need to turn to the pages that have got the pattern pieces on for the dress. So we've got a sleeve here, which is part of the dress, and we've also got the bits here, which is the back bodice, the front bodice, and the dress collar. These two bottom bits here have both got pinafore on them there for the pinafore. We'll use them later. You'll notice that there's no pattern here for the skirt, and that's because the skirt is one long rectangular strip that we're going to then sew together and cut out and sew together. And we referred to it when we were making the pantaloons, the bloomers, because we needed to make sure that we left that nice long strip at the bottom, and hopefully you've done that. But in order to move on with these, you'll notice that I've got two lines on my pattern here. The first line is the photocopied line, which is the sewing line, and that's that. And then you'll notice here I've added a few little dots, and that's where I've added on my seam allowance. There is a video on my channel for how to add on the seam allowance, but if you're jumping straight ahead into this one because you've got the other bits done, then I use a seam gauge like this one, or you can use a tape measure, and I put the 1/4 inch mark on the drawn line for the pattern piece, and then make a line across. And by keeping my ruler at right angles to the drawn line, it means that you will actually copy those curves where you need them. And then if you put a little dot where each of those marks are 1/4 inch in, and then join them all together, as you can probably see I've done just there, that's hopefully quite easy for you to see, then you'll have your new line. Just remember that on the front of the dress bodice you don't need to add any seam allowance to that fold line, but you do on the back of the dress bodice, because that hasn't got the symbol for a fold. Okay, so I've drawn it round the neck, shoulder, arm side, side seam, waist seam and back seam of the back. I've skipped out this side part here with the fold, and I've done around the back of the front of the neck, shoulder, arm side, side seam and then waist, and then I've done all four sides of the collar as well, and then that's all we need. Oh, and the sleeve as well. On the sleeve we've done exactly the same thing. I've done my little dots, as you can see, and then joined those together in order that that gives me a cutting out line on my fabric. Okay, once you've done that, then you will need to go and get your tissue paper. Mine's hidden in here, I think, if I remember correctly. There's my sleeve pattern. Find my other bits. Dress bodice back, pinafore, collar, dress bodice front. That's what we need. Make sure everything else stays together in your kit, and we'll take out the fabric that we need as well. Okay, so once you've got your little lines on your pattern, and if you've watched any of my other videos before, you'll be bored of this bit, but I always keep my master copy of my pattern intact, and I will trace off or make duplicate copies of my pattern so that I always keep one copy intact, and that will stay with my box. And then if ever I lose any of the pieces that I need to make this character in the future, should I wish, then I can go back to my box and I know that all of the pieces are in there that I need. And I'd suggest that you take a few moments just to do the same, because it's not only when you've lost it and then you've got to rebuy the pattern that you can find out the value of it all. You're then going to take sheets of tissue paper, put them over the photocopied sign, and then you're just going to trace your lines through, including your grain line, which is this line just here. That line there you're going to copy across, and then you're going to, and the marks here for gather, centre and gather, and we've got Lillian, sleeve, cut 2, and that's how we're going to do that. And you can see that once I've done that, I've cut out on the lines of my pattern pieces in order that I've got a tissue paper copy to use for my patterns. So we have got the sleeve, the dress back, the dress front, and the collar. So the next thing that I did then was, let me just pop that to one side, is that I have extended the grain line. So you remember we had a shorter grain line on the pattern piece, and I've just taken a straight edge. It doesn't really matter what you use, but I've then extended that grain line up and down. It's the symbol with the double-edged arrow on the edges, and I've taken it the full length of the pattern piece, and I've done that again on these as well. This will just help us get this a pattern piece straight of grain when we're attaching that to our fabric. So once we've done that, let's put those to one side, because the next thing then we're going to do is have a look at our fabric. And we know that we need to do a piece for the skirt in the instructions here when we go onto the dress. If I just find it. Then with the dress, for the dress skirt, you need to cut 10 inches by 44 inches. Just checking that I got the right measurement for that. So before I start and cut out my other pattern pieces, I'm going to make sure that I cut out that piece first. And to do that, I'm going to match up my selvage edges to make sure that the fabric is nice and straight. And you can tell a selvage edge because it has this like bound edge on it. And we've got 2 of those because this is going across the piece of the fabric, the whole width of the fabric. And what we want to do is make sure that this bottom edge first is all nice and straight, because we can only measure from it when we're sure that it's straight. It's going to be interesting getting all these pieces out, but hopefully we should be able to. So the first thing that I'm going to do, so when you smooth your fabric across, you'll see if it'll lie straight at your folded edge down the bottom there, and just smooth it with your hands. You want to have your selvage edge together here, so they're on top of each other, and then we want this edge here to sit nicely. You're looking for it not to have anything where you've got it going off at an angle and you can sort of tell that the fabric isn't sitting straight. You want to just give it a bit of a waft, and it should then hopefully all just lie in place. And we've got a slight difference here at the bottom here, so I'm going to neaten that up with as little lost as possible first. Then I'll measure my 10 inches along, and then I'm going to take that piece of fabric off to make sure that's all straight. Now to do that, the easiest way is to treat yourself to some quilting rulers and a rotary cutter, because that really is the easiest way to do this. If you haven't got that, you can draw a line, you can pin your fabric together and then draw a straight line, making sure that everything's all straight, and then you can cut on that line if you wanted to. But I'm going to use my quilting supplies. So So let me just turn this fabric around the other way for working with it for a second. Let's make sure we've got it as straight as it can be. Okay, let's just come off slightly there. Okay. So now with the quilting ruler, which this is a nice big long one, this one's 24 inches by 6.5 inches. This one's made by Millwood. And I can pop these long straight lines here across the folded edge or the selvage edge, and that's going to tell me when this fabric is absolutely straight. And we've got a little bit of a bow in it, can you see? So therefore just here where it's sitting a little bit proud of the fabric. So I'm going to take it right up to the edge, make sure that it's on straight of grain as much as it is, and then keeping my fingers out of the way, I can make my cut. So that gives you a lovely, lovely, quick and easy straight line. And they're not overly expensive, the rulers aren't, but they're a great investment. Right, now that we've got that sorted, we are now going to use a different ruler. And we are going to measure in our 10 inches, which is what we need for the skirt. So I can get this one all lined up on this cut edge now. And then this ruler here can butt right up against it, and I'll know that that's right. So that's fine there. Slide that along, just make sure that that's right, just go out slightly, and then up to here. And that's, so now I'm going to hold on to my piece of fabric, and I'm going to very carefully make my cut, making sure my fingers are out of the way, all the way through to the end. Let's just make sure that's going to, yeah. Oh, gosh, caught slightly. No, we haven't, that's fine. So now I'm going to put this piece out of the way, because that 10-inch piece needs to stay out of the way so it doesn't get used up by the other bits that we're making. And we need to find our sleeve pattern and our other bodice pattern pieces, which are here. And now we can see about making these all fit onto our fabric. So sleeve is the biggest part, so we're going to start with that first. I've got the right sides of the fabric together, just making sure that's all nice and straight. And then because the sleeve pattern is the biggest one, we're going to start with that first. So first of all, I just roughly place that onto the fabric, and then I'm going to have my pins, and I want to have a tape measure. Because what we want to do is we need to measure from the grain line to the fold line, and I can see on the grain line here that that's lined up nicely. And you can have a look on the back of your fabric, and you can see the north to south and east to west fibres, the warp and the weft fibre, and you can see that these ones here are starting to fray slightly because that's not the selvage edge. This here's the selvage edge here that is bound. And so using that as a guide, we can see how those fibres are running, and that will help us make sure that this fold line here is as straight as we can possibly get it. So I've just finger pressed that just straight, just to be ready for us. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is measure from the bottom of the grain line across to the edge. And we can move it to 5 centimetres. That's 5 centimetres at the bottom, so let's put a pin just in the bottom there. Don't take too much fabric, just enough. Oh, it's shifted slightly if you noticed. It can do that. Keep my finger on it. Right, so that's got that on. And then we're going to go to the top of the grain line now, which is why I like it to be extra, and that's 5¼ centimetres. So I know that it's not straight at the moment because that grain line needs to be straight. So we want the same measurement at the top and the same measurement at the bottom. Smooth your pattern piece down. I could have moved it up slightly, but I'm not going to move it now. Try not to waste fabric if you can do it. And then I put a pin at the top and the bottom. That means that that piece now is secured down and I can pin around it later. But let's have a look at our other pieces that we've got to do. So we've got a collar piece here, and it's just about whether we can fit any of these. We can't fit that piece in there because it's going to impact on there, and neither can we fit on the back, but they will go down here. So let's now get these pieces lined up. So let's do this collar piece first. So again, we're going to look for that grain line, and then we're going to measure across. That's 13.5 centimetres. Put a little pin in to hold that still for me. Just don't try and take too much fabric, because you want to be able to pivot your pattern piece. And then across 13.5, just needs to come out slightly. There we go. And if you start to make sure that your pattern pieces, especially on woven fabric, are on straight of grain, you'll get a much better result out of your finished garments, because they won't twist when you're wearing them. Sometimes if you get a t-shirt and you're ironing it and you can't get the side seams to lie straight, it just means that piece, garment wasn't, or pattern piece wasn't on the straight of grain when it was manufactured. On here we can take the fold line, and the fold line goes right up against our fold with no gap at all, and we can pop that on there. And pop that on, so it isn't we don't need to use the grain line, because we can use the fold line for that one, that's fine. And then the last piece that we need is this this bodice piece here. And we're going to have to cut 4 of those, and we're going to have to cut 2 of these, and we're going to have to cut 4 of the collar. So we have got some more to cut out. So if I move that along, we might be able to get one further down there. But we've also got this fabric over here that we can also use. So just make sure everything's nice and straight. And we can measure from the selvage edge on this piece here. Let's move this piece along here, and that will be better measured from the selvage edge. So let's measure again. Top to, do it in centimetres, that'll be easier for everybody, won't it? So that's 4.5, and at the bottom 4.5, so that's straight. So now I know that that's straight, I can put a pin in top and a pin in bottom. Make sure that you don't cut out over your pins when you come to cut these out, because there's a lining as well for this top. So we've got everything now pinned on for the first copy. We only have to cut out the 2 of the sleeve, so that's fine. So we can just pop the rest of the pins in here now, and then we will cut all of these out. But then we will have to cut out an extra bodice front, bodice back, and an extra collar as well, in order that we have the correct number of those. And if you wanted to save your fancy fabric and use a plain fabric for your lining, you can do, or you can just use, there's plenty of fabric in the kit, if you've got the kit, to make sure that you can cut that out, and you can have the same on the lining as you've got on the outside. So let me just go and pin these on. Let me go and cut these out, and then I will then be cutting out the additional copies of these pattern pieces, and I'll meet you back here when you've done the same. Okay, so here we are, we've got our sleeves cut out, we've got 2 of those. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put some little snips in where the notches are. So we've got a little notch here, one at the top and one at the side here. So just turn your pattern piece round, and where those notches are, you're just going to snip in just a couple of millimetres. You just need one little notch like that, so it just marks the place on that pattern piece. You don't want to go too far, a couple of millimetres is plenty, and that will just mark those 3 points for you. And then we can continue to take our pins out of there. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look very carefully at our fabric, and we're going to open them out, because we want to see whether we had right sides together of our fabric or wrong sides together, because we want to mark the right side of all of these pieces. You have a little look, right, that's definitely the right side, so the right side is a bit clearer to me. So I'm going to do a double pin, so I do a pin with like that through the middle. Can you see how it's got two bites of the fabric? And that will tell me that I've got the right side on both of those. Once I've done that, I just put them together, put my pattern piece back on again, and just put one pin through to hold those together. Let's do the same on the dress fronts here. Take out, we haven't got any, I'll tell you what, we'll do one little notch just in the centre front here, just a couple of millimetres, and one at the bottom there. That's all we need on there. to just help us when we're matching the skirt up. And again, I'm going to open that out and see which side. Right, so that's my right side. It's just the white slightly, the marks, the swirls on the fabric are slightly clearer. So let's have a look again. Yep, on the outside. Oh, I didn't do those notches, did I? Let's just do those notches on here as well. It'll just help us when we're lining everything up. So the centre front and the centre at the waist. And then put your pin in to mark your front. And because the pin's gone through twice, that's how I'll remember, because that's not how I normally pin things. Normally when I'm pinning a pattern on, I'll just go through the ones. So then once we've done that, let's pop that pattern piece onto there so we know what that is. And then again, let's do the same with the collar. I've got two that I've cut out already. So that's the right side and that's the right side. Put it through twice, Claire, so you remember. That's it. And that's the right side of this one. So that's one pair. I'll take the pins out of this one. So we had to cut out, if you remember, we had to cut out 4 of the dress collar. So by cutting the fabric on the double, then we cut out 2 at the same time. So let's mark this one and hope you're marking yours. You'll be surprised how easy it is to get them mixed up if you don't just take a couple of minutes just to do this step. So that's my second pair. And also with the collar, we can see we've got a left and we've got a right where they're going to meet from the shape. And that's really important that we've got those 2 pairs, because it would be very easy to get one the wrong way round. And then when you're trying to make all this fit together, this fabric jigsaw, you'd struggle. So just make sure that you've got 2 curved edges together and 2 of those more angular edges together. And you've got your 2 pairs, and then put them together in their pairs, and then just pop a pin onto those 2 just to hold them all together. And then you're going to do the same, exactly the same with your dress bodice as well. And it's really important again that we make sure that we've got that absolutely the right way round as well, because we want our left and our right. We don't want two left or 2 right, otherwise they're not going to go together. We need this long edge here to go together. This is the neck edge, and then this is where the sleeves are going to go. So again, we need to mark those to make sure that they're right. And if you mark in the middle of your piece, as long as you've not got a really delicate fabric, those pin marks will come out with a little bit of steam or a little bit of water. It just helps the fibres relax. That's one set. And then let's just finish off this one just to be completely thorough. You might have jumped ahead because you might have already worked out all of this, but let me just make sure these are right as well. Right, that's it, that's that one. Okay, so once we've got that, you'll be looking in your kit for your lace, and I'll meet you back here when you've found your lace. So the first thing we're going to do is take one of our dress bodice fronts. Just need one of them at this moment in time. Let's put the other one, still keep the pattern piece on that. One's going to be the outer and one's going to be our lining. And the first thing we're going to do with our outer, let's just take that pin off for a minute, make sure you don't get it mixed up. And we're going to take our piece of lace and we are going to put some lace down the front of this bodice, and we need to leave a 1/4 inch gap. So remember, we've got our line. I'm going to put a little short line. No, let's just have a look and just see. So this is a 1/4 inch rule. I'm just going to lay that down, and then we want a piece of lace going down the front of the dress. Let's make sure we've got the right side up of the lace. And make sure that if it goes round the neckline, that it's straight for there. So you go right up. So you don't want to be having your lace like this mashing up the front and then it sort of end into nothing on the edge there. You want to make sure that your lace goes right the way up in order that it's in place. It goes right the way up to the shoulder, which it does. And then when you're ready, you can put a pin in to hold that in place. And we'll go to the top and do the same. And then when you're sure that you've got enough at the top there, which I have, then I'm just going to snip that off. Now I'm being quite frugal with my lace because I don't want it to, run out. And then at the bottom here, you're going to try as much as possible. Try and get your scallops of your lace in line with each other if you can do. I'm going to have another 1/4 inch, so you're having your 1/4 inch in from the edges. You could always just put a pin to mark it as well. But as long as you've got that little gap, just that little decorative gap, you'll be fine. And then we can then put a pin in to hold this in place at the top and at the bottom again. Again, make sure that when you're cutting off your lace, you're going right to the top of your shoulder. Can you see how I've got my scallops pretty much matched here on the edges without wasting too much lace? I would suggest you try and do the same with yours as well. It will help just make it look neater if you've got these sort of scallop edges over the edge from each other. Just making sure mine's as right as it could be. Maybe not. Let me just move it down again and just make sure. It's all that little attention to detail, isn't it, that just makes it an outfit that you're really, really proud of when you've finished, rather than just thinking, oh, it doesn't matter, and then your eye always being drawn to that anomaly as you go forward. And just put a pin in the middle there just to make sure that's going to hold that there. Now, if you wanted to, this is how mine's looking. So I've got a 1/4 inch gap down the middle there from the centre point, that little nicks that little notches that we put in. You could now just go and just put a line of tacking around those should you wish. I'm going to sew mine straight away, but if you wanted to put your line of tacking on, please do so. I've got my sewing machine set up with an all-purpose polyester thread, but you can use a cotton thread if you wanted to as well. I've also got a size 70 or 80 Schmetz Microtex needle in my machine too, and I've got my bobbin thread to match. And what we're going to do first is we're going to sew down the front of these pieces of lace. So the first row is going to go through the centre of the lace. Or is it going to go through the centre lace or just to one side? Let's do it just to one side of that lace and see how secure that holds it. So let's take the pin out first. Couple of stitches back. Quite small there, that's fine. Try not to get your lace to bunch up, and let's put our needle in the work just to hold everything all nice and neat together. We've got quite a small stitch going on my machine at the moment, but that's okay. And so let's take those pins out. Just lift your presser foot up if you need to just lift a pin up, but make sure you anchor it down with something. You don't want it shifting on you as you move it. And then when I'm up into the seam allowance, I'm just going to take a few stitches around this neckline that are going to be in the seam allowance, and I'm just going to hold that lace just in place in that seam allowance. I'll show you in a second. So let's take that needle out of the work. I might be alright without having to do the other bits. So here's my first piece. So I've just gone up along the side of this edge here, and I've just gone around the edge here in the seam allowance, around the edge there. This bit here is free at the moment. I suppose we could leave that free, couldn't we? I was going to stitch it down, but I think actually it might look nice if it's left free. So let's do the other side now. So I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. So line your fabric up and your lace, a few stitches forward. I'm only on a size 1 stitch at the moment, stitch length, so it is quite small. I wanted them to be really small and delicate stitches so that they didn't show through the lace. So back up again towards that seam allowance at the edge, and then once I'm in that seam allowance, I can lift up my presser foot, leaving my needle in the work, and just pivot round this neckline just to attach that lace down. And you're trying to get this come out on your shoulder point at the same point with your lace, which is why having the scallops on your lace matching works really well. So when we finish, that's what we've got. If we go on this side, you can see there's those 2 rows of stitches. Whoops, slid down. 2 rows of stitches, and then each one goes off and around the neckline just to hold that down so that lace doesn't get folded under when we're trying to work with it. And we'll just do the same with the bottom here and just go across the bottom here, and that will just hold that lace in place again on this bottom edge so it just stays flat out. And it is worth just taking your time just to do a couple of little stitches like this, because there's nothing worse than thinking, oh, it'll be fine, and then actually it isn't, and you've got to undo all of your lovely gathers. So there we go. So across the bottom, up the front, and across out to each shoulder. We're only going to, once we've done that, we can now trim back this lace here back to the original fabric, the fabric that goes underneath, in order that it's the same length as the fabric, and we reinstate that neckline from the straight pieces of lace. There we go. So that's all nice. I'm just going to tack those 2 little bits of lace. Once we've done that, we're then going to be working in the double, if you like, because we've got one front here, and this is our other front bodice piece, which is going to be our lining piece. Keep your pattern pieces separate and safe. So let's go now to the backs of our pattern pieces. And remember, we've got 2 sets of these backs. We've got a left and a right on each one. So that's one set, and that's the other set. Because whatever we're going to do to this front bodice, we're going to do, to this front bodice, we're now also going to do to this second set, which is going to be the lining. Okay, so we're going to now take these 2, let's just put those pieces together because that's going to be our piece we'll do next. Let's work with our front that we've just been working on, and we're going to take our front pieces and we're going to turn them round so that the shoulder seams match, and that straight edge there, can you remember we had that long straight edge? This is our neck edge here. This is upside down now, not the wrong way up. The right side is still up because we know because of our pins. But we've turned this piece from, remember when we were looking at it before, it was here. This is our waist edge, and this is the centre back edge. This is our neckline here, and these will be where our sleeves fit. In order for us to be able to pop this onto our front correctly, what we want to do now is just take both of those pieces and to turn them upside down and sort of change them over sides so that the shoulder seams match onto each shoulder like that. And when we look at it, our sleeves give us a nice curve both sides here, and our neckline gives us a nice seam here, and then those straight edges here are for the centre back, and then these bits here will go towards the waist when we've finished. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. Just watch the video back if you need that again, because then what we're going to do with this front one is we're going to flip it over so that it's right sides together with the lace front, and then we're going to match up these shoulder seams, and we're going to put 2 pins in on those shoulders, 1 at each end, and then we're going to take our second one and flip that over the top as well so the shoulder seams match. We can take our pin out because we know we've got right sides together now facing, our pins telling us the right side and wrong side have done their job, and we're going to put those pins in that shoulder as well. We can take this to the sewing machine now, and we're going to sew across here and across here. So let's take our stitch back up to a 2, which is what we use for these smaller clothes, and we're going to reverse at the start and the stop, and we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance on these. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work. We can take out the first pin, and then we're going to sew across now. We're going to stop when we get close to our second pin and take that one out, and then we're going to come off the end, but we're going to reverse at the end. So reverse. That'll just hold it all together for us, and then let's take those little starting and stopping threads off. So we've got a nice little shoulder seam like that. Now let's do the other one. Just be careful because my fabric is wanting to eat into my machine. So just give a little bit of pressure on the threads at the back, and that will then make sure that it goes through smoothly. And then we can take that off, so that's the second one done. Okay, so that's the second shoulder done. So now when we open this out, we can see we've got our shoulders joined. This is our neck edge and everything's right. We're now going to go ahead and repeat the same process on our other one. So let's put that one to one side. Let's find our centre front again. And then let's get our two backs here where they are together. And then we're just going to sort of twist them round like we're going around a clock face, so they're upside down, and then we can fold them on top of each other onto the front that we've already got. We can take out the pins marking front and back now and use those just to hold it together. And then we can do the same with the other one, fold it over on the top. Now the reason why I don't just use one pin on this very short shoulder seam is because your temptation is to put a pin in the middle. And when you go to your machine, it's very easy for that seam to then twist. Can you see how that's twisting? And it can twist when you go to your machine. So if you just make sure that you've got a pin at the start and a pin at the end, you'll get a much neater shoulder seam, because there's no way now that that fabric can shift or move whilst you're taking it to your sewing machine. So let's just pop that inside there. 1/4 inch seam allowance, reverse at the start and the stop. And then we'll have two bodices. This is actually be the bodice itself. The bodices will be the same then. We want the same seam allowance on both so that they'll match perfectly when we come to pop these together. Out the way. And there we've got our bodice lining without the lace, and here we've got our bodice with the lace, and those are both the same and ready to go. Okay, the next thing we're going to be working on is the collar. So if you want to pop these two to one side and find your collar, and then we'll be working with that next. Okay, so we've got our pattern piece for our collar off. Let's take that off, and again we're going to have these two sets, a left and a right, and that's what I want you to pop them onto at the moment in terms of this. So then what we're going to do now is take one set in each turn, and we're going to put one on top of the other. Now if you've got a different fabric for your lining as for your front, you may need to just sort of match up your lining with the top to make sure that, say those were my lining fabric and these were my top fabric, I can't put those two together because I'd only end up with one side of a collar. So just make sure that if you are using different fabrics for your collar, as in for the lining and for the upper, that you're getting the right combination so that when you've finished you'll have a left and a right with your top fabric facing upwards. So always put it out on your work surface in order that you can work that through. So for me, because I've got the same for both fabrics, I don't need to worry. So I'm going to put these two on top of each other. And once I've got those on together and I'm sure that they're right, I'm going to match those up. I'm going to put a couple of pins in just to hold these together for me. Matching those raw edges. And this is why we need to be careful on our 1/4 inch seam allowance, because with something as small as this for a fabric piece, you need to make sure that these are going to match absolutely on top of each other perfectly. And then when I've got one here, look, I've just crossed over my pins just so that I've got some clear room to work. Then we can take the next one, pop those right sides together as well, pop those pins out, and then we can then match these up to be able to sew these together as well. So when you've got your two sides, when you've got it pinned like this, it's going to look the same, but one of them will end up being the other way around with the curvy edge together and the straight edges apart. Go back to our sewing machine. And this time we're going to start on this edge here. Now just note the angle you've got here, because you want your presser foot to start, don't sort of cut off that corner. Your presser foot has got to start so that it's following the edge of that cut edge. That's the way that I do mine. If you've got if you've cut yours out doing it the tailoring way, where you've got a sewing line to follow, then you'll just follow your sewing line. But if, like me, you're more used to home sewing and dressmaking, then you'll use the edge of your fabric to determine where your 1/4 inch seam allowance is and match it up with the edge on your machine. So we need to see the angle that collar is going into and make sure that the edge of the presser foot mirrors that angle, because that's what's going to give us that beautiful curve on that collar as we go through. So let's just start with this then. So let me match that collar up just there. I need to just move my presser foot, that's right, to give me my 1/4 inch. So a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, and then we're definitely going to need our needle in the work because we're going to be pivoting around this very tight corner. So almost immediately I can see that my line of my presser foot is going to come off my edge of my fabric. So I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot and just change direction just very slightly. Just do a few more stitches and then very slightly again. It's just a very subtle change, and the more often you change, the smoother that line will be. Let's take that pin out now. And that's what we want. We want a lovely smooth line around this collar. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3 stitches at a time, and that's absolutely fine. Just go nice and slow. It's not time for zooming. And the more care we take, the better this collar is going to look once it's finished. Take the pin out as we get there. This is a nice sweep-in curve, so that's not so bad, but we still need to just stop every now and again and just adjust. Let me take that pin out because that's going to be in the way. So try and keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way round. So if you're not careful, you'll end up with one side of your collar slightly bigger than the other if you're not careful. So when we get to 1/4 inch from the end, we're going to stop, needle in the work, and then I think I can do one more stitch, and then we're going to then go up here to the edge and reverse at the edge. Okay, needle out. Let's have a little look and see how we've done. Take the threads off. We've got a loop on the back for some reason. Not quite sure why. Might be a thread that's just got caught. So there's our sewing on the back there. Hopefully you can see that. So we started here, started here, didn't we? And then we've gone a lovely smooth line, even though we're sewing in straight lines and changing direction. Look how smooth that line is, all the way around here. Pivoted there and then came back into the edge here. We're going to do the same with the other one, but I'll show you what to do with this one next, because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off this corner. So we've got a right angle corner just here, and we're going to take that slightly wider than 45 degrees. You see that just taken off there. And then on this curved edge, we're just going to take out some little triangles like this. Up to, but not through the stitches, sort of like a couple of threads away from the stitches. And this will help this collar when we turn it lie flat, because the edge here is longer than the edge will be when it's on the inside. And if you're not sure about notches is just like really important to do. But if you're not sure how effective it is, then I would suggest that you notch one collar and you try turning the other collar without notching it like this, and you compare the two when you've finished, and just have a little look, because you can go back in and just change the notches on the other one that you've not notched, because I think you'll want to when you see what a difference it makes. Can also use shearing, pinking shears if you wanted to. The rule of thumb is that the tighter the curve, the tighter together your little notches should be. So your little snip should be. If you go through your stitches by mistake, just load it back into your machine and just come a hair's breadth inside those stitches and do another row, and that will just reinforce that seam for you. But just take it nice and steady going around your corner. Watch out you don't go through your stitches. Oops. Don't take a little triangle off there, and eventually you'll get round towards the beginning. We're back onto almost straight here, aren't we? And it looks like it's a bit of a faff, and it looks like it takes a bit of time to do. It doesn't take as long as you think, because I've just done that in real time for you to see, and that's what mine looks like with them. This is fairly straight, so that doesn't matter so much, but round here, look how close together those triangles are to make sure that's all as it should be. And then what I'm going to do is just going to finger press this just to help it turn. So just going to fold in the edges with my finger and just fold along those straight edges with my fingers. And again here, I'm just going to sort of use the heat and I suppose the moisture from my fingers just to sort of press that line, separate that seam allowance, and just push one to one side, and then I'll push one to the other side. It'll just help you when you're turning this round, because it's so fine and so thin that it can be difficult just to get that to lie really lovely and flat. So just keep pressing all of those in, just like this, just one side, not both sides. That's it, nearly there. And then on the other side, just fold those back. So you're folding the seam allowances out of the way, if you like, of that seam. And you can just turn it straight around if you want to and just poke it out, but this, because it's just such a small little delicate collar, the less pushing and shoving and pulling and forcing you've got to do, the better. So just by doing this, it'll set it off on the right path for you. So you can see how those seam allowances are being pushed out to one side. Then when you've done that, being very careful not to stretch this edge, you've got to be really careful and delicate. Let's just turn this round the right way. Got a little pointy edge and a little rounded edge on my seam gauge, so I can use those to ease these edges out. This fabric's quite thick and quite stiff, so it's going to need a little bit of coaxing. Just make sure your fingers are nice and clean as well. And then you're going to get a lovely, lovely smooth edge on your collar. Let's just do the same in here. Let's just push it out, just very, very carefully, very, very gently. You want to just ease that out to those stitches. Just make sure everything's lying nice and flat. Use the heat of your hand again just to push that out. Perhaps I'll show you on camera. If I do the next one and I don't smooth it, hopefully you'll see, but the best way of understanding about why we notch curves is just to do that quick experiment yourself and just to have a go at doing one collar notched and one collar not, and that will just help you see. But I'll do mine and just show you, so that if you don't have to, if you don't want to then, but I certainly wouldn't ever not notch a collar like this, because you want it to lie lovely and flat. So once we've got that to there, I will go in, we're going to press this, make sure that all of your seam edges, just roll it between your fingers and just make sure that all your seam edges are right out on the, your stitches are right on the edge. And you've got that lovely curve to the front of the collar there. And then I will put some little tacking stitches in just to hold those two edges together, and I'll show you those when I've done those, because that's quite quick and easy to do. But I'll just show you that, and we'll take those out afterwards once it's been sewn. But for now, it'll just make sure that when you're sewing it, you don't end up with one side coming in or the other. Let me just do the other one, and then I'll just turn it round for you without notching it, and hopefully you'll be able to see how lovely and flat this one is and how bumpy that one will be. Okay, so here's my collar, and that's without the notched edge. So let me just turn this round and just show you how this is going to look. Because I think you'll see, try not to stretch it, but when you're trying to get it to lie flat, it just doesn't really want to go quite as flat as the other one. And being as this collar is going to be front and centre of your lovely dress on your character, and the corners, we don't want anything to be lacking in its imperfection, do we really? As much as we can get it, as close as we can get. So the first thing I can feel is that there's bumps underneath here. You might not be able to see them, but I can feel in here where there's fabric that's bunched up and is not lying flat. The edge as well, if you can see, I don't know if you can see how lovely and smooth that edge is there, but look how straight, straight, straight. So in between those little bumps that I can feel under here that you perhaps won't be able to pick up on the camera so well, it's just not sitting as smooth. So that's absolutely, you know, the classic example. I know that I've not turned this one quite round, but I don't want to force it to be flat when it doesn't want to be. But you can just see on the edge there as well. Look, can you see how bumpy it is compared to this one? Okay, so that's the lesson in curves for you. So I'm going to turn mine back round the other way. I'm going to clip the curves on this one, and then I'm going to turn it round properly, and I'm going to then tack that neck edge together so that both sides are sitting together nicely, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so here I've got my two collars, and I've just tacked those edges just inside the seam allowance so that hopefully we don't catch those stitches when we pop it in. But what I have done is just laid one on top of the other, just to make sure that the curves and the size of them are as identical as I can get them. If one was too much bigger than the other, or the curve was different, then I would go and make another one. But as they are, those fit on there perfectly happily, so I'm quite happy. And when I lay them down, I've got a left and a right with the curved edge just here and the straight edge just here. So now I'm just going to take my iron and my pressing mat and my press cloth, and I'm just going to press those nice and flat with a little bit of steam, just to help them hold on to their shape, and they'll just come out really lovely and flat again and very neat. And you'll always be able to tell from this point forward who's clipped their seams and who hasn't by how smoothly those collars do just sit. And there we go, that's a lovely collar just there for our character. Okay, so the other thing is I'm using a silk organza press cloth just because it's transparent, so you can see through. Oh, I've got bits of faux fur, look, from sewing Lillian's ears. So it's lovely and transparent, and you can see through for how you're placing your fabrics. But you can also use a cloth, fabric handkerchief, or you could use a pillowcase, or a thin tea towel as well would work as well, and you can just use that to absorb the heavy heat off your iron before it goes onto your fabric. It's always a good thing to have to hand. Okay, so now we've got our two bits of collar all nicely pressed. We're now going to find the front of our bodice. Got that one, that's not got the lace on. We want the ones with the lace on. We're going to just finger press open these side seams here on the shoulder so that they lie nice and flat. Got a little bit of lace in there, so it's not going to lie quite as flat as we'd like, but we'll do our best. If you just run your fingernails across that, it'll just flatten that out and hold it flat for you. Okay, so I'm going to put that down on our desk so that the seam allowances are open on the bottom, but that the collar is all standing all nice on the top here. And what we're going to do now is going to match this up. So remember that little centre point that we did, that little nick that we did in the middle of our lace? We're going to make sure that one side of our collar is right on that nick, and then we're going to put a pin in. And we're going to make sure the pin comes out the other side of the fabric. Mine hasn't, that's it. And then we're just going to make sure that this collar follows the shoulder line. So let's make sure that seam allowance is open, and then put a pin on the shoulder line as well to hold it still. Oops. Sometimes you have to pick it up to put the pins in, don't you? And then it should follow perfectly the back of this collar as well, and we're going to make sure that there's a pin holding that in place along the bottom there too. So we've got those 3 pins in. If we look on the other side, you've got one at the centre front, or one just to the side, one on top of the seam allowance and one on the back. And then you guessed it, we're going to take our other collar, and making sure if you've got different fabrics top and bottom that you've got the right side of your fabric pointing up. We're going to lay that collar as well right upon that point again on this side, right on there, and then we're going to have a pin holding that in place just at that point. You're going through quite a bit of fabric, so just bear with it. And then again, we're just going to make sure that we're going through that open seam allowance on this collar side. So make sure your fabric's all lying flat for you. So pin through that one. And then on the back here, just make sure that that's just all flowing nicely down the back side here as well. So if we look at that now, we can see that the collar meets at the middle, and then it's then going around the back and it's following the line. The raw edges are all together, and they've not got one more, one more prominent than the other. And what we're going to do now is we're going to just do a little stitch just inside the seam allowance, just to hold all of this together for now. So I'm going to use my white thread. We can take it out if we need to later on, but let's just get this just attached on. So I'm going to go just slightly inside the tacking stitches that I did previously. And then let's just move our pins out of the way as we go. And we're just wanting to make sure, do you know, I didn't know before I started filming about my little finger keeps sticking out. And now I try and poke it down, but it doesn't always want to. So once we're going round, let's take the pins out as we go. And we're just keeping on that very edge of that neckline, just to hold everything in place. And if you need to, leave the needle in the work, lift up your presser foot and just pivot your work fabric round. Making sure that everything's all staying all nicely together. And this is just going to make sure that when we're trying to pin the lining on, that we're not trying to do too much in one go. Just onto the edge there, and that will just hold that in place for us. Let me just take those threads off, starting and stopping. And hopefully you'll be able to see this side. I've just got right on the edge of that neckline just there at the moment. It's just holding that collar in place. The stitches here that we've got previously were just holding the two sides of the collar together so that it didn't sort of come undone on the other side. And now we've got that all nice and neat together. Now, we're going to do, it's hard to know, words Claire, it's trying to make sure that we can do this next bit in the neatest way possible, because in the instructions you would now put your lining copy onto the neckline, and we would then sew around and attach those two together, and we may well do the same. But then from that point on, once you've turned the collar round on these shoulder seams where these sleeves are going to be insert, you'd then use that as one in order to then put your sleeves in. And I like to have mine so that it's nice and neat on the inside, and so we're going to do it slightly differently. It might be slightly more complicated, but just stay with me and just follow the directions with me, and we will do it together, and I'll make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think at the end you'll come out with a neater collar, neater bodice inside that you're happy with. So what we're going to do now is we are going to let's attach our sleeves in first before we do anything else, and I think that's going to be the best thing to do, because that will then help. So we're going to put our lining to one side for the moment. We've got our collar attached. We can see how that's going to look all lovely when that's all finished off. But for now, we're going to go to our sleeves. Take our pin out, keep our pattern piece all nice together, and let's just pop that to one side for the moment, that bodice to one side, because we're going to put some gathering stitches. So I've got my two sleeves here, and I know I've got the right side up so that I've got the right side of the fabric up. And what we're going to do first is we are going to just press down these edges here, because we need to put some lace on the end of the sleeves. And so we're going to turn up, how much do we need to turn up? I think probably just 1/4 inch. Yeah. So we're going to do a double hem, and we're going to turn up 1/4 of an inch and then another 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to sew that in place, and then we'll get some of the lace and we'll be able to pop that on the bottom of the cuff like we did with the bottom of the with the bottom of the bloomers. So let's get our iron into place, ready to do that. Okay, so we've got our sleeve here. I've got the right side down. We're going to measure up 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to put a pin in on this side here. Let's put a pin in at the middle. It's just there. And then one at this end, and that will just make sure that we don't burn our fingers when we're just pressing this hem down. I'm going to use my press cloth because the bottom of my iron is a little discoloured at the moment and I haven't had a chance to clean it off. So let's just give that a bit of a press, take the pins out, and then we can then just press that down again. Just make sure that's all done, and then we're going to give it a blow just so that it cools it off, and then we're just going to do another turn so that it's had that double turn, and we'll put those 3 pins back in again just to hold that nice and steady for us. Press cloth again, just fold it over, and then that's just going to give that. It is easier to do these sorts of hems whilst your pattern piece is in the flat. So we've not got any gathering stitches or anything like that in it as yet, and that will just make it easier. So go ahead now and do the same to the other one as well while you've got your ironing board out, because we can then just quickly turn this up and we'll be able to move on to the next stage, and we'll put some gathering stitches in the top of our sleeves. Before we put those gathering stitches in, let's just run a row of stitches just to hold these hems down. So again, I am going to move my needle across to the left-hand side, because that way then I know I can get nice and close and get a nice straight line. And I'm just going to take a couple of, I'm just going to run straight across with it. So we're going to be going across again anyway with our lace on. But let's just do this for now. So just run straight from one onto the other. Oops, that's it, stay up, press the foot, and then we'll just take off those edges that we've just started and stop in threads. Now I want to put the lace onto the bottom of the skirt first before I do my sleeves, because I want to make sure that I've got enough for everything. So for now I'm not going to add the lace on just now, but I will do that later. But that's just that double hem there, just sewn on there, just holding that down. The next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to change my thread colour in my machine, because when we are doing the gathering stitches around here, it's much easier to take them out when you've got a different colour. So we're going to use the same colour I use for my tacking thread, and I'm going to fill my top thread and my bobbin in this colour, ready for doing the gathering stitches. And I really would suggest you take the time to do this same step, because when you're gathering stitches in the top of your sleeve here are the same, and we'll do the same with the skirt actually while we've got this thread in. If the colour's the same, sometimes you can pull on the wrong thread, or you can try and unpick the wrong thread, and then you have to spend time to go and put it back again. Whereas if you use a different colour, you always know what colour your gathering stitches are, and that makes it much easier. So let me just get my machine changed over with my threads and I'll be back to you. Okay, so we've got our thread in the bobbin and the red thread in the top, and if you've got a machine that cuts your threads for you, just remember that you need to have some thread to pull onto, so you need to switch that off and rethread your machine so that you've got some ends to pull for this gathering. And then what we're going to do is, can you remember we put those little snips in on our sleeve? So you should have a snip on the left, a snip on the centre, and a snip on the right, and we're going to start at one and work all the way through and go all the way through and finish at the other one. The first row of stitches is going to be slightly less than 1/4 of an inch, and the next row of stitches is going to be slightly more than 1/4 of an inch. Let me show you what I mean by that. So find my notch, and then I can start. So let's just, oh, and the other, we are going to reduce our tension as well. I've taken my tension down to a 2. So I've kept my stitch length the same, but I've loosened off the tension on my stitching so that I can pull those threads more easily. So I don't reverse and start and stop. So here's my first row. So I've got some threads to pull to be able to gather it up, and I've got some threads at the end, and there's my stitches for my first row, under 1/4 inch. And here's my second row of stitches just over. So my row of stitches when I'm attaching the sleeve will go in between those 2 rows of stitches, but we need to have these long ties, so don't get carried away and cut those off. And repeat that onto your other sleeve as well, so that both sleeves have got these 2 lines. And if you can see, they both start and stop where those notches were that we put into our sleeve. So go through the centre one, because that's going to mark where the centre seam is on the shoulder seam, but this one here goes all the way through to that side. So do the same on that, and then I'll meet you back here. Now, before you change your threads back again, can you remember we cut out the fabric for our skirt? Make sure you know which is the top side of your skirt, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing. So choose one side, and then we're going to run 1 row of stitches less than the seam allowance. And maybe I do take my stitch length up slightly. Take it up to a 3, that'll be better. So all along one top edge. Try and keep it as even as you can do. I've just stopped before the end because I've got that selvage edge still on mine, which we will cut off, but I've just taken it quite close. And then we're going to go put the fabric back in the machine again, and we're going to do the second row of stitches wider than the 1/4 inch again. No reversing at the start or the stop, that's just the row of gathering stitches put in. So now we can change our thread back, because we've finished with our gathering stitches now, and we've done this job on the skirt a little bit early, but it saves us some time later on when we go to do the rest of it. Just change my thread over. Before you do anything else, don't forget to change your tension back. So I put mine back to a 5, which is where it was originally, in order that it's all ready to go. You'll be surprised how many times it's possible to forget to change your tension after doing some gathering. So that's just your little reminder to do that. So the next thing that we're going to do now is going to go to one of our sleeves, and on the top of the fabric here, we can tell the top because of the hem at the bottom, we're going to separate out the 2 top threads from the 2 bottom threads on both sides. They just get a bit twisted sometimes. They just need to have your top ones from your bottom ones. And then if you hold on to your threads in your hand, wrap them around your fingers, and then hold on to the fabric with between your finger and your thumb, you can then pull on your thread gently, and you'll start to make some little gathers in your fabric, and that will just gather up the threads. Now, it is easier for sometimes to gather up the bobbin threads, and I've gone for the top threads. So I'll carry on for now, but we just want to start and get a little bit of a gather going. So maybe I should have done my bottom threads. Switch over, Claire. So hold on to your bottom threads, and then you should be able to gather that up. Mine's not wanting to today. Come on. You're trying not to break your threads. That is the aim of the exercise, not to break those threads. But you should start and see those gathers, start and pull in that extra fullness that's going to give you your sleeve cap. Can you see how that's curving around my finger now? And that will be nice for when you come to put that sleeve into the dress. So let's try the other one, because the other one will have I'll have used the bobbin threads on the other one. Maybe it will be easy, and just show you the difference. Separate out those threads. 2 from the top, from the 2 from the bottom, then holding on to them. Yeah, that's easier. So your bobbin threads are generally easier to gather up than your top threads. Sometimes it depends on the actual thread itself as well, but separate out those 2. There we go. Hold on to those finger and thumb on the fabric, and then just you're pulling the fabric up along those threads, and that will just give you that lovely little gather at the top of the sleeve. So then let's take our bodice. Let's choose one of our sleeves. Now luckily the pattern for our sleeve, let's just check it. Oh, we have got a front and a back. So the slightly slopier one is the back and the slightly more acute one is the front. So let me just work out. I think it's so minor that we're not really going to notice it. Yeah, that's my back. Okay. So let's pop this onto the sleeve. So you want to right sides on together so that you've got the slightly slopier one to the back. And the first thing we're going to do is find that centre notch, and we're going to match that directly on top of our centre seam on our shoulder seam there. So just pull your collar out the way for the moment. So the middle notch, so this notch just here, is going to go on top of your seam allowance on your shoulder. So let's just find that one point first, and we're going to get our pins, and we'll put a pin in at that point, just at right angles to the edge. You can see with the edge popping out. Then we're going to go down to this side here, and we're going to twist that round. So you can see the edge of this, you can see how the two curves are going opposite directions. There's your armhole, and here's the top of your sleeve. We're going to pull round so that this part here of your sleeve is against the edge at the side seam of the bodice. And then once we've done that, we're going to pop another pin in just there. And then we're going to come round to the other side now and do exactly the same on the other side, so that that side there is against the bodice. The raw edges together, remember, and pin that. So we've got our start point, our end point and our middle. And what we can see is that this edge here of the sleeve is longer than the edge of the bodice. So where we've not got any gathering at all, we're just going to lay that on top of the bodice, put the right side, the edges together, and put a pin in up until that first notch. So just moving the fabric just so that you've got them, so it should lie on top of each other until we can, oh, that's a bent pin, we don't want that one. And then we can then stop at the start of the gather. Stop at the start. It's confusing for you, isn't it? So I've got about 3 pins in, look, along that arm edge. So let's show you on this one. So I've got about 3 pins on from here to here until the gathering starts. And that's what we're doing on the back here, okay? Just make sure that's all lying all nice and flat. We don't want any puckers being pinned in to where we're working. There's going to be some tightness of fabric, but that's okay. Let's come to the other side now. And I've stopped, I've not done anything else with the gathers, and we're going to again lie this fabric flat on each other so that the raw edges are together. So just manipulate it with your fingers until you get those edges together, and then you can put a pin in. And then we're going to go to the start of those gathers, and again we're just going to lie things on top of each other, and then we can put another pin in just there as well. Because the next thing that we're going to do now is find our edges of our gathering that we started to tie up, because now we're going to gather this up even more so that it fits right. I've gone through one of my threads with my gathering, but you see how I can tell where my gathering stitches are because they're the different colour. Easier for you to see as well. So that's on top of there. Okay, so there's our 2 gathering threads there. Let's find the 2 from this side as well. Hopefully they're nice and easy to get. They are. Okay, and what we're going to do now is we're going to gather up this fabric on the sleeve hair, on the edge of the sleeve, until it sits flat, till the gathered edge sits flat against the same length of the shoulder pad up to that side of shoulder seam. So we're gathering it up either side. And at some point you'll get to where you can see all of those gathers, but you can see that the fabric wants to sit against itself nice and flat. And at that point then we're going to put a pin in to hold it where it is. And then let's just do the same on the other side. Got a thread in the wrong place. Let me just pull that down. It's got caught on there. Right. So felt it go then, that's it. So again, this side here, everything's all lying flat. Although I've got the gathers at the top, I'll show you in a second what that's going to give us the effect. It's just going to give us that puffed sleeve effect on the top of the shoulder. So when you look at your bodice from the inside, I can see there's no puckers along the line that I'm going to sew. You see that all the way around, no puckers. But then on this side here, you can see the gathers in the top. And if I just go like that, can you see how we've got the lace on the bodice, and then this is going to be the gathers on the top of the sleeve to give it a bit of a puff sleeve. Once you've done that, if you want to, you can go ahead and you can put some tack-in stitches in. I would use a different colour than your ordinary stitching threads, and just tack that in. I can manage to navigate around my pins, so I'm going to do that. But if you're a beginner, then don't worry, just do those gathering stitches now, just to help you. And then I'm going to take my stitch length down to a 2 on my machine, and I'm going to have the flat side of the bodice down against my machine bed, and I'm going to control my gathers on the top here. So we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just line that up on your machine, and then we're going to do 2 stitches forward, 2 stitches back, and then we're going to make sure we've got our needle in the work just to anchor everything down, and I can take my first pin out. So then we're just going to take our time. We're making sure that the fabric is as flat as it can be in front of for the next few stitches in front of the presser foot. So keep into that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then stop. So at the next pin, take that one out. And let's just pivot slightly because we're on a curve, and we're wanting to try and keep everything all nice and neat. So a little bit more and stop. And then we're going to go on to our gathers. So I'm just going to make sure that as far as I can tell, everything's lying all nice and flat. Then we're going to sew over the top of these gathered bits of fabric. Try and keep the seam allowance neat on the edge of your shoulder. Taking the pins out. That's it. Everything's all nice. Just make sure everything's all lying all nice and flat. Take your pins out before you get to them, because they can mess up your machine if you sew over the top of pins. Just move some of the fullness of the fabric just round towards the back so we get a nice flat edge. And we're coming down towards the edge here. So again, we just want to twist it round slightly. Take the pin out at the very last minute, and then reverse at the end. Let's keep our fingers crossed and see how that's gone in. So cut through our threads and take off our starting threads. Keep everything nice and neat. Don't take out your gathering stitches until you've had a chance to have a look. So here I'm just going to have a check. So I can see there's no puckers been sewn in along here. That's my threads, don't worry about those, they're all okay. Across the top of the shoulder there, that's all fine, and then down the other side, that's fine too. So I'm happy with that. Now let's have a look on the sleeve side. So here there's no puckers. We've got our gathers at the top of the sleeve, and there's no puckers there, so I'm happy with that. So you can see how I've sewn in between those 2 rows of the gathering stitches. So now we can clearly see which is our gathering stitches, because we've got that lovely red colour. My threads just got caught slightly back. And then I'm going to take one at a time from one side. Oops, that one, let's take that one. And then I'm just going to pull that thread, and eventually it'll all pull out, and then I can find the counterpart from underneath and just pull on that, and it'll all come out. So again, this side, just gently just ease it through, and then again pull the other side out, and then when you've finished, you've got your lovely gathers. These pinpricks will disappear. We can always put a little bit of water on those if they don't quite. As long as we've not snagged the fabric, we'll be fine. And then that will then give that lovely, when we sew the sleeve, can you see how do the side seams and the sleeve? Can you see how that's going to puff up just beautifully on the edge of that collar, on the edge of that sleeve, and that collar is going to go right almost to the edge of that sleeve there, just nicely. Okay, so the next job then now is to put the other sleeve in on the other side so that we can then move forward with the next bit. Okay, so once you've got both of your sleeves in, then your bodice will be looking like this. So you've got the lace and the collar, and then we've got a sleeve here and a sleeve here. The next thing we're going to do is just take our lining fabric, and we're just going to do a prep step on here. So first thing we're going to do is open out the seam allowance on the shoulders, and we're just going to finger press that open like this on both shoulders, and that'll just hold that flat for us. And then if we look at the orientation, let me just put that out of the way. So here we've got our neck edge, here we've got our arm side, and these are the side seams that are going to join together in the end. What I'm interested in at the moment is these arm side seams here that go around where the sleeves fit in on the actual bodice itself. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sew, can't get the right words, sew a single line of stitching in our white coordinating thread round that arm side at 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And that's going to give us a reference point for turning this section under. So let's go onto our machine and let's just do that single stitch. So I'm just going to put it in my fabric. We don't need to reverse on this, it's not holding anything together, it's not going to take any tension. And then we're going to leave our needle in our work just so that we can pivot nicely around this arm side. Take your time, no rush. It can be more or, you know, kind of, you're trying to have it as close to 1/4 of an inch as you can, but if it wobbles slightly, don't worry. And then round the other side. Off. Okay, and we're going to just do that on both sides, but I'll just do one side now just to show you. So that's what we've got on the edge there. And what we're wanting is this reference point. So we're now going to do some little snips. Now, because this edge here is tighter than it will be there, we only need to just do snips up to, but not through, that stitching line. Can you see? And look what happens when I pull that open now. Those can stretch to go around the corner. So let's carry on up to, but not through. As you get to your seam allowance, just go onto the inside, and where you've got these little corners that just stick up, I would just snip those off. So you're snipping at an angle, so you kind of make a little point on it like that. Just take some of the bulk out of that seam when we come to sew it all together. So all the way down, and again, like I said with the little triangles that we've done before, the closer together, the sharper the curve, the more closely together those little snips should be. And when you finish, you'd be able to open that out flat, and those little snips will spread to accommodate that curve. Because the next thing that we're going to do is using our fingers, and eventually we can use the iron, is just press all of those little snips on that stitch line through to the inside. And we can use our iron, but sometimes it's just easier just to start them off with the pressure and the heat from your fingers. It doesn't have to be perfectly onto that line, but that's our reference line to not go beyond. And what that will do is when we come to put this bodice inside, it'll give us a nice neat edge to hand stitch the lining to the sleeve, so that it gives us a lovely clean finish. So let me do the other one, and then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other one, and then I'll get out my pressing mat and I will press from this side with my press cloth, and I'll press all of those little snips, that seam allowance, all inside to the wrong side of the fabric, and then we'll come back. Okay, so here's mine all nicely pressed now. You can see that seam allowance pressed through. And if you just turn it round, you can see how a lovely finished edge that gives you. And if you've not pressed right up to those edges, you can either do it slightly more if you wanted to, or afterwards you can take out this little row of stitches if you wanted to. Depends how much it bothers you. But the next thing that we're going to do now is take our main bodice with our lace and our collar on, and we're going to turn our lining upside down so that we've got right sides together, and then the snip at the centre front we're going to put right on that collar where that collar meets in the middle, and we're going to pop a pin just there to hold that together. And then we're going to go to our shoulder seams, and we're going to make sure that our shoulder seams are on top of each other, and then we can pop a pin in just there. Make sure your raw edges are together. Let's do the other side. So match those up with the shoulder seams. And then we're going to then come to the right angle at the end of where the collar has been fitted and match that. Then we're going to go down to the bottom of the straight edge here, which is at the bottom of the back. I'll give you a bit better orientation in a second. So, centre here, there's the arm that we've just neatened against the sleeve, and that's correct. And then we've got a straight edge, which will be the centre back. Then we go into the curve round the neckline, and then I'm just going to pin this other side together here. So hopefully, and you can see the end of my collar just inside there. So hopefully that will help you orientate yours. And just down to the bottom just here. So we're going to take it to the machine now. We're going to start at the bottom here and sew up to here and pivot, and then we're going to go all the way around this neckline and then all the way down the centre back again in order to attach the bodice onto the lining onto the bodice. I'm going to move my needle across to the left because we're sewing quite a tight curve here. The less you have on your presser foot on the fabric that you're sewing, the easier it will be. So I'm just going to move my needle across. I've got 0 on the left and I've got 7 on the right, and then 3.5 is in the middle, and I want the minimal amount of the presser foot to be on the work. But what I need to do is measure from my needle into the sort of centre gap in order that I've got some idea of where. So I'm using my seam gauge and I'm putting my finger against my needle, and then I can then put my seam gauge up against my needle and I can eyeball then whereabouts that 1/4 of an inch is, and I can see it's just on the join there of my presser foot, so I know where I need to feed my fabric in order to get me that 1/4 of an inch, which is there. So let's just hold on to the threads, couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work because we will be needing to pivot and take that first pin out. So let's just carry on up the top here. So we're about 1/4 of an inch away from that right angle on the corner, and then I can turn my fabric 1 more stitch. That's it. Then turn my fabric, and now I'm going to go around the neckline. So you're trying to keep your fabric straight on your neckline, but keep it out of the way of where you're sewing, and leave your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and then just twist your fabric slightly as you need to. You're trying to keep to the round of the neckline without pulling or shoving your fabric. So just keep everything all nice and flat, and you're attaching the collar at the same time. So you want this seam allowance around the front here to be nice and neat, because that's going to secure that collar down for you. You just stop and just pivot and release the pressure under your machine if you need to, under your needle. And here just struggling as it goes through the lace. To go to the 1/4 inch at the bottom here, and we're going to go straight, make sure your fabric's lying flat, and then we're going to go straight down the back. Needle out of the work. that's what we've got now. So we've got a straight edge here with our sewing around the neckline as neatly as we could, and then down this side. So before we can turn this round, we've just got a little bit more prep to do. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take off these corners at the top of the right angle. So just slightly more than a 45-degree angle across there. And again on the other side, so make sure you do both sides. So that's the kind of shape that I've taken off. Look, it's just slightly more than 45 degrees. And then what we're going to do then is just on this round neck, we're going to snip up to, but not through, those stitches that we've just done. You need some nice sharp scissors because you've got to go through the collar as well as through the fabric that you've got anyway. So just make sure they're going through. If you do go through your stitches, just put it back in your machine again. And just, I could do with my snips really, I don't know if I've put those. These embroidery scissors are just struggling with through the layers of fabric at the moment. But again, you can see on this neckline that when we pull it open, those snips open out in order that this will lie flat. Let me just find my snips because they will do the job better, and I'll be back to you in a second. Okay, I've picked up my snips. I've popped them in my an embroidery project bag. So it's better. Just make sure you're not snipping through anything you don't want to snip. You're snipping through the collar, and in some places the lace too, and the lining fabric and the bodice fabric. Take off any seam allowances that are flicked up that you don't need anymore. Quite a few layers just there. And this will just help that neckline stay flat once we've turned it through. Okay, so there we go. I've missed a little gap just there where I thought I'd got some through and I haven't. Okay, so that's all those snips all the way along that neckline edge along there. And then we can now turn the lining through into the inside and turn our corners through as well. That's going to give us a nice edge down this back. It's easy when you start turning things around to kind of lose your orientation a little bit because everything sort of looks a bit crumpled and doesn't look in the same level as it would do originally. Just using a pin just to pull out that little corner. Just make sure you're very gentle with it, otherwise you'll pull some fibres out that you don't want to pull out. Just that. Let's go into this one. Okay, and then this bit's all poking up at the moment, but that will poke down. We're going to do something called understitching on there, which will help that all sit down. But you can just for now start to see how this dress is going to look with the collar all tucked in and sitting beautifully on the shoulders, just like that. So the next thing we're going to do is something called understitching, and I like to do understitching on adult clothing as well. It's a little bit fiddly on the toy clothing, but it is well worth doing. Just before we do that, I've got some little bits of the tacking from the collar sticking out, so let's just get those out because we don't want that dark thread being fixed in any more than it is already. So just undo that those stitching threads. And they were on the collar. Should be able to just see them on the inside and just pick those out. Right, so I'm just going to go off and just take these out so you're not having to watch me concentrate with these, getting these little threads out. But at this stage I would take them out because they'll be easier to take out now than they will be able to take out later. So let me just pop back in a second.